Have you ever wondered about the untold stories from history that could change your perspective on the past? Well, in today's video we will look into a lesser-known and controversial part of history, the astonishing connection between teenage sexuality and the Hitler Youth during the Nazi era. Sounds baffling, right? Well, join us as we explore this complex story that's sure to make you question what you thought you knew about the Nazi regime. Let's explore and reveal the long-kept secrets. Part 1, The Hitler Youth, a deeper dive into its formation and ideals. To give you some context, the Hitler Youth was an organization formed in 1922, but its roots can be traced back to the Wandervogel movement in Germany. The Wandervogel was a youth movement that emphasized reconnecting with nature, self-discovery, and the spirit of adventure. It's intriguing to think that the Hitler Youth evolved from such a seemingly innocent beginning, isn't it? The Hitler Youth initially formed as the youth wing of the Nazi Party and grew rapidly in the following years, especially after Adolf Hitler came to power in 1933 and became the leader of Nazi Party. The organization aimed to indoctrinate young people with Nazi ideology and prepare them for future roles in the Nazi state. The early years of the Hitler Youth were marked by a struggle for power and control within the Nazi Party. Different factions vied for influence over the youth organization, but ultimately, it was Baldur von Schirach who emerged as the driving force behind the Hitler Youth. Von Schirach was a dedicated follower of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party. Under his leadership, the Hitler Youth turned it into a massive organization with millions of young Germans. But how did the Hitler Youth relate to their peers, especially when it came to matters of love and relationships? The Nazi regime had a unique and troubling approach to teenage sexuality, one that would have far-reaching consequences for the Hitler Youth and beyond. Part 2, Sexual Liberation and the Nazi Ideology, a surprising connection. Let's look into this surprising connection between the Nazi ideology and the sexual liberation among the Hitler Youth. You might be wondering, how could a regime known for its strict and oppressive nature encourage sexual freedom among its youth? It's quite a paradox, isn't it? The Nazi regime believed that promoting sexual freedom among the Hitler Youth would serve two main purposes. First, it would help increase the birth rate, creating a new generation of Aryan children to serve the Reich. It is commonly associated with the period from 1933 to 1945 when Adolf Hitler was in power. Second, it would help to break down the traditional family structure, allowing the state to exert even greater control over its citizens. In other words, the Nazis saw sexual liberation as a tool for achieving their political and racial goals. To achieve this sexual freedom, the Nazi regime took some pretty radical steps. They introduced sex education programs in schools and even encouraged teachers to discuss sexuality openly with their students. Sounds progressive, right? However, it's important to remember that these initiatives were driven by a twisted agenda. The sexual liberation among the Hitler Youth wasn't limited to education, though. The organization frequently organized mixed-gender camping trips and other activities that facilitated contact between boys and girls. These gatherings often led to sexual encounters, which were not only tolerated but encouraged by the leadership. It's fascinating to think that, at the height of the Nazi regime's power, they were actively promoting sexual freedom among their youth. But this seemingly progressive approach would have disastrous consequences for the young people involved. So, what do you think about the Nazi regime's approach to sexual liberation? Do you believe that their motivations were purely political, or was there something more to it? Part 3, The League of German Girls and their role in the sexual revolution. What do you think was the role of the League of German Girls, or the Bund Deutscher Mädel, BDM, in the sexual liberation of the Hitler Youth? As the female counterpart to the Hitler Youth, the BDM played a crucial part in the Nazi regime's plans for their teenage members. The BDM was established in 1930 and targeted girls between the ages of 10 and 18. Just like their male counterparts, the young women in the BDM were indoctrinated with Nazi ideology and prepared for future roles in the Nazi state. These girls were organized into local units and participated in various activities, such as physical fitness, sports, camping, and learning domestic skills like sewing and cooking. They were also taught Nazi ideology, focusing on the importance of racial purity and the role of women in the Third Reich. The BDM aimed to produce ideal Aryan women who would become wives and mothers to a new generation of racially pure Germans. To encourage relationships between the BDM girls and Hitler Youth boys, the Nazi regime often arranged joint activities and gatherings. As we discussed earlier, they encourage interaction and foster relationships between them. But what about the girls themselves? How did they feel about their role in this sexual revolution? It's important to remember that these young women were raised in a society that glorified motherhood and the Aryan race. For many of them, the idea of bearing children for the Reich may have seemed like a noble and fulfilling purpose. However, it's also crucial to recognize that not all BDM members were willing participants in this sexual agenda. Some girls resisted the pressure to engage in sexual relationships, while others felt exploited by the Nazi regime's expectations. The consequences of this sexual liberation would be far-reaching and devastating for many of these young people. Were these young women merely pawns in the Nazi regime's twisted plans, or did they have agency in their own lives? Part 5: The long-lasting impact of teenage sexuality among Hitler Youth. As we reach the final part of our journey into the hidden truth about teenage sexuality among the Hitler Youth, let's take a moment to discuss the long-lasting impact this controversial chapter of history had on the lives of those involved. It's crucial to remember that the consequences of the Nazi regime's policies were deeply personal for many young people. Now it's time to uncover the lasting effects of this sexual revolution on the survivors of the Hitler Youth. When World War II came to an end and the Nazi regime crumbled, many members of the Hitler Youth and BDM found themselves facing an uncertain future. The ideology they had been raised to believe in was exposed as a brutal and oppressive regime responsible for unimaginable suffering. This sudden shift in perspective forced many of them to re-evaluate their own experiences and the choices they made during their time in these organizations. For some, the sexual relationships they had engaged in as teenagers left them with deep emotional scars. Feelings of guilt, shame, and regret haunted many survivors as they struggled to come to terms with their actions and the consequences they faced. Unwanted pregnancies, forced marriages, and the lifelong impact of sexually transmitted diseases were just some of the burdens these young people carried with them. But despite the darkness of their past, many former Hitler Youth and BDM members found ways to move forward and rebuild their lives. They sought out education, formed new relationships, and, in some cases, became advocates for peace and tolerance. Their stories serve as a powerful reminder of the resilience of the human spirit, even in the face of unimaginable adversity. So, as we reflect on this often overlooked aspect of history, it's essential to consider the individual stories and experiences of the young people who lived through this tumultuous time. What can we learn from their journey, and how can we ensure that future generations don't fall prey to similar ideologies? How do you think the survivors of the Hitler Youth cope with the lasting impact of their experiences? And what lessons can we take away from this chapter in history? Share your opinions in the comments below, and remember to stay curious and keep learning.